The sun cast an eerie purple glow through the thick, gaseous atmosphere of Jarnak 4. Corporal Elias Brandt stood at attention, his standard-issue boots sinking slightly into the spongy terrain as the alien dignitaries filed past him. He was the only human in sight, surrounded by the various species that made up the Galactic Alliance's 47th Reconnaissance Battalion. The smell of methane and organic decay permeated the air, masked only slightly by his respirator. "The Earth representative," announced a monotone translator device, as Tuong Verex, the Harkian commander of the battalion, stepped forward. The tall, gray-skinned alien's 4 eyes narrowed as they assessed Elias. His exoskeleton armor gleamed with the insignia of 17 successful campaigns. "This is who they send? A corporal?" Elias maintained his posture. "Sir, Technical Advisor Saunders was recalled due to a family emergency. I was the replacement with the highest terrain engineering qualification available on short notice." The commander's upper lip curled. Humans. Always some excuse for inadequacy. He turned to his officers, speaking in his native tongue. The translator picked up fragments. Primitive species. Barely space-capable. Token inclusion. Elias had heard it all before. As the newest members of the Galactic Alliance, humans were viewed as barely evolved primates who had stumbled into faster-than-light technology through sheer luck rather than intelligence. The fact that Earth still used physical labor for some tasks was seen as evidence of backwardness, not resourcefulness. The Vizari lieutenant, Nex, adjusted her neural interface as she approached. Her species' translucent skin revealed the complex network of enhanced neural pathways that allowed her to process information at speeds humans could only dream of. "Corporal, do you possess current xenotopographical implants? The standard galactic military package includes terrain adaptation, sensory enhancements." "No, Lieutenant," Elias replied evenly. "I rely on physical measurement tools and observational training." The ripple of amusement among the alien officers was impossible to miss. Nex's skin flushed a pale blue, in what Elias had learned was embarrassment. Not for herself, but for him. "How quaint," she said. "Like watching ancient history in motion." A Drenak scout, skin patterned with bioluminescent spots that shifted with his mood, chittered something that the translator didn't catch. Whatever it was made the others laugh. Elias remained still, face neutral. His instructors at the Alliance Integration Academy had prepared him for this. Don't argue. Don't try to prove yourself with words. Observe. Learn. Act when necessary. Tuong Verex activated his command interface, and a holographic map of the region materialized in the air. "Our mission is recovery, not first contact. 3 days ago, a research vessel went down in the Mirkwood Marshes." He pointed to a dark green area, approximately 20 kilometers away. "The ship carried valuable research data on the magnetic anomalies affecting this planet. We retrieve the black box. We leave. No heroics, no delays." The map zoomed in, revealing a treacherous landscape of interconnected swamps, with patches of what appeared to be solid ground scattered throughout like stepping stones. "The indigenous life forms are mostly non-sentient, but highly territorial. Your combat systems will be synced to identify threats." The commander turned to Elias. "Human, since you lack integration capabilities, stay in the center of the formation. Try not to slow us down." Elias nodded. "Yes, sir." The Vizari lieutenant approached him after the briefing, offering what appeared to be a small metallic disc. "A temporary neural link. It won't give you full capabilities, but it will at least keep you connected to our navigation system. Consider it. Charity." Elias looked at the device, then politely shook his head. "Thank you, Lieutenant, but I'll manage with standard equipment." Her skin flushed blue again. "Stubborn primitives," she muttered, walking away. As the team prepared to move out, Elias double-checked his physical pack, where the others carried minimal equipment, relying on their advanced tech. He had packed survival tools, a waterproof fire starter, carbon fiber rope, a multi-tool knife, water purification tablets, and a physical compass with magnetic shielding. Items considered obsolete by galactic standards, but which had served humanity well for centuries. The battalion moved out at dawn, hovering transports gliding effortlessly over the swampy terrain. Elias was assigned to the rear transport, where he sat silently, watching the alien landscape unfold. The vegetation was unlike anything on Earth. Massive trumpet-shaped plants that seemed to follow their movement, vine structures that periodically contracted like muscles, and floating fungi that emitted spores in rainbow patterns. He took mental notes, sketching occasionally in a small waterproof notebook. A Harkian warrior named Gorich noticed this and snorted. "Physical recording? Why not just capture it with your retinal implant?" he asked, genuinely confused. "Don't have one," Elias replied, continuing to sketch. "Then how do you remember things?" Elias tapped his temple. "The old-fashioned way." Gorich shook his head. Mandibles clicking in what Elias had learned was the Harkian equivalent of a dismissive laugh. "No wonder your species needed our help to join the stars." Elias didn't argue. The Alliance had indeed accelerated Earth's technological development by centuries, but that didn't mean humans had nothing to offer in return. They had traveled about halfway to their destination when the first signs of trouble appeared. The sky, already an unnatural purple, began to darken to a deep indigo. The transport's engine made a high-pitched whine. "Magnetic disturbance," called out the pilot, a Visari navigator. "Level 3 and rising." Tuang Verex moved to the front. "Push through it. We've dealt with worse." The navigator nodded, adjusting controls on a holographic interface. "Compensating." Elias felt the hair on his arms stand up. Static electricity. He looked at the darkening sky, then at the increasingly agitated plant life around them. The trumpet-shaped flowers had closed tight, and the floating fungi had descended to the ground. "Sir," he said, addressing the commander, "the local flora is exhibiting defensive behavior." Verex didn't turn around. "Keep your observations to yourself. Human. Our sensors will alert us to any genuine threat." A moment later, the transport lurched violently to one side. A flash of blue-white light split the sky, followed by a deafening crack that seemed to physically press against Elias's eardrums. Lightning. But unlike any storm he'd seen on Earth. This bolt seemed to hang in the air, branching out like the roots of a tree, each tendril seeking a target. "Shields!" shouted Verex, but it was too late. The lightning found them, connecting with the transport's metal frame. Instead of a single strike, it pulsed, sending wave after wave of energy through the vehicle. The navigation systems went dark, the hover engines sputtered and died. And most alarmingly, the neural interfaces of every alien soldier flickered and went offline. Cries of pain and confusion filled the air as they crashed to the ground. The transport skidding across the marshy surface before coming to rest at the edge of a wide, dark pool. Elias had braced himself against the impact, one arm hooked through a support strap, the other protecting his head. As the transport settled, he quickly assessed the situation. No fire, but the smell of burned circuitry was strong. The aliens were in various states of distress, many clutching their heads where their neural implants had overloaded. He moved quickly to the nearest exit, forcing the manual release since the automatic doors were offline. "Everyone out!" he called. "The transport could sink!" Through the haze of pain, the alien soldiers responded to the authority in his voice. They stumbled out onto the marshy ground, disoriented without their neural enhancements. Verex was one of the last to exit, his proud posture now hunched, one hand pressed against his temple where a thin line of silvery blood seeped through his fingers. "Status report," the commander demanded, though his voice lacked its usual force. The Visari navigator was trying repeatedly to activate her neural interface, her translucent skin flashing erratic patterns of distress. All systems offline. Magnetic pulse has disrupted not only the transport, but our neural networks. Temporary? Asked Varix. She shook her head. Unknown. This level of disruption was not in our predictive models. The other transport had suffered the same fate, having crashed about 100 meters away. As the teams regrouped, the full extent of their predicament became clear. All advanced technology was non-functional. Navigation systems, communication arrays, weapons platforms. Even their basic translator devices were offline. They were stranded in an alien swamp with no way to call for help and limited means to continue their mission. Varix called a council of his officers, their conversation taking place in a mixture of languages as they struggled without translators. Elias stood at a respectful distance, taking the opportunity to survey their surroundings. The terrain was even more treacherous than it had appeared from the air. What had looked like patches of solid ground were actually floating vegetation mats, some strong enough to support weight, others deceptively fragile. The dark pools weren't just water, but a viscous fluid that seemed to have mild acidic properties, judging by the way it was already beginning to corrode the metal of their downed transport. Most concerning was their position. They had crashed on the edge of what appeared to be a massive swamp basin. Ahead lay kilometers of treacherous marsh, with their destination, the downed research vessel, somewhere on the far side. Behind them rose steep, rocky cliffs that would take days to scale without their hoverpacks. The alien soldiers were growing increasingly agitated. Without their technology, they were cut off from the constant stream of data and communication that their species had evolved to depend on. Some paced nervously. Others sat in stunned silence, while a few attempted to repair their damaged equipment with increasing frustration. Elias approached the commander's group cautiously. "Sir, if I may?" Varix turned, his four eyes narrowing with irritation. "What is it, human?" "I've been observing the landscape. There's a pattern to the solid areas. They follow an underwater ridge system. If we map it correctly, we might find a way across." The Draenac scout, who Elias now knew was called Rune, chittered in his native language. One of the officers with a partially functioning translator relayed. "He says it would take days to map such a system without scanners." Elias shook his head. "Not necessarily. The plant life gives it away." He pointed to a line of the trumpet-shaped plants. "They only grow where their roots can reach solid ground. We can use them as markers." Varix seemed unconvinced. "And how do you propose we cross the gaps between these markers? Our hoverpacks are useless." Elias took a breath. "We build bridges, temporary floating platforms to connect the solid areas." The ripple of dismissive laughter was immediate. "Floating bridges? Made of what?" asked Nex, the Visari lieutenant. Elias gestured to the dense vegetation around them. "There's plenty of raw material. Those fallen log-like structures have excellent buoyancy in this fluid. I tested a piece while you were in council." The commander stared at him for a long moment. "You expect elite galactic forces to engage in manual labor? To build primitive structures out of vegetation?" "I expect us to complete the mission and survive," Elias replied evenly. "Sir." There was a tense silence. Finally, Varix spoke. "We will attempt to repair our equipment first. Your suggestion will be considered only as a last resort." Elias nodded, knowing it was the best he could hope for. "Yes, sir." The next few hours proved fruitless for the alien technicians. The magnetic pulse had not only disabled their equipment, but had fundamentally altered the crystalline components that powered most galactic technology. Without replacement parts, repairs were impossible. As daylight began to fade, a rapid process on Jarnac 4, with its quick rotation, the reality of their situation settled on the group. They were stranded, their technology useless, with a mission still to complete and no clear path forward. Elias didn't wait for permission. As the aliens continued their futile repair attempts, He began to gather materials. He identified the strongest log-like vegetation, testing pieces for buoyancy and structural integrity. He stripped fibrous vines that could serve as binding material, soaking them in water to increase their flexibility. By the time darkness fell completely, he had assembled a small test platform, a raft about 2 meters square, bound together with woven vine rope. The aliens watched with a mixture of curiosity and disdain as he pushed it out onto the viscous fluid of the swamp. It floated perfectly, the dense material of the logs resistant to the mild acid of the water. Gorik, the Harkian warrior who had mocked his sketching earlier, approached as Elias tested the raft's weight capacity. "That will never hold against the current," he said. But there was less mockery in his tone now, replaced by a reluctant curiosity. Elias looked up. "There's a current?" Gorik nodded. "Weak but present. The fluid flows toward the center of the basin during nightfall, returns to the edges at dawn. A tidal effect from the moon." Elias considered this new information. "Then, we'll need to anchor the platforms more securely. Thank you." The warrior seemed taken aback by the gratitude. He watched in silence as Elias modified his design, adding diagonal bracing and anchor points. As the night deepened, more of the alien soldiers drifted over to observe. Some began to offer suggestions, drawing on knowledge of similar environments from their homeworlds. A few even helped gather materials, though they did so awkwardly, unused to physical labor. Lieutenant Nex was one of the last to join, her translucent skin now a dull blue in the bioluminescent light of the swamp vegetation. "Your method is inefficient," she said, watching Elias struggle to bind a particularly thick vine. "I'm open to suggestions," he replied without looking up. To his surprise, she knelt beside him and took the vine. Her slender fingers worked with unexpected dexterity, weaving the material into a much stronger configuration. "On my world, before technology, we built floating cities on toxic seas. The principle is similar." Elias nodded appreciatively. "Show me." By midnight, a small group had formed around Elias's project. The Visari lieutenant taught more efficient binding techniques. Gorik contributed knowledge of how to test ground stability before placing anchor points. Even Rune, the Drenak scout, helped by identifying which plants were safe to handle and which contained toxins. Tuang Verex watched from a distance, his posture rigid with disapproval, but he did not interfere. As the alien night creatures began their haunting calls across the swamp, Elias had completed 3 solid floating platforms, each about 4 meters long and 2 meters wide. He approached the commander as the others rested. "Sir, with respect, we need to make a decision. The platforms work, but building enough to cross this basin will take at least 2 days of concentrated effort. If we're going to attempt it, we should start at first light." Verex was silent for a long moment, his 4 eyes reflecting the bioluminescent glow of the swamp. "You take a great liberty, Corporal, organizing my soldiers without authorization." "I didn't order anyone, sir. They volunteered." "Because they are desperate. Because without their technology, they grasp at any solution, no matter how primitive." Elias met the commander's gaze steadily. "With respect, sir, adaptability isn't primitive. It's survival." Another long silence stretched between them. Finally, Verex spoke. "Dawn, we will assess your progress and make a decision then. Until that time, you have my permission to continue." Elias nodded. "Thank you, sir." He returned to his makeshift camp to find several of the aliens still working by the light of bioluminescent fungi they had gathered. Lieutenant Nex had organized them into teams, each focusing on different aspects of the bridge construction. "Your commander gave his blessing," she asked, as Elias approached. "Provisional approval," he replied. "We'll know for sure at dawn." She nodded, her skin shifting to a thoughtful purple hue. "He will agree. He has no choice." She hesitated, then added, I may have misjudged your methods. Corporal, they are unorthodox but effective under these circumstances. Elias offered a small smile. High praise from a Vizari. Do not become accustomed to it, she replied. But there was a new respect in her tone. The night passed in a blur of activity. Elias worked alongside the aliens, teaching and learning in equal measure. By the time the purple light of dawn began to seep through the gaseous atmosphere, they had constructed enough platforms to extend nearly 100 meters into the swamp. Tuong Verex inspected their work with a critical eye, testing the strength of the bindings and the stability of the platforms. The alien soldiers watched anxiously, many of them having invested hours of physical labor, an experience entirely new to most. Finally, the commander turned to Elias. Explain your full plan, Corporal. Elias gestured to the rough map he had sketched in the soil. We follow this route, using the trumpet plants as markers for solid ground. We place floating platforms to bridge the gaps. The platforms are mobile, so after crossing each section, we can move the rear platforms to the front, leapfrogging our way across. And if we encounter indigenous life forms, we maintain a defensive perimeter. The platforms are sturdy enough to support your warriors, even without powered armor. Verex considered the plan, mandibles clicking thoughtfully. And the estimated time to reach the research vessel? 3 days, if we work efficiently. The commander's upper lip curled slightly. 3 days to cross 20 kilometers? With functional technology, we would be there in hours. Yes, sir, but we don't have functional technology. The tension was palpable as the commander deliberated. The alien soldiers watched, their future hanging on his decision. Finally, Verex straightened to his full height. We proceed with the humans' plan, he announced. Lieutenant Nex will coordinate the construction teams. Gorik will lead security. Rune will scout ahead for the most stable route. He turned to Elias. You will supervise the bridge placement. Any sign of structural weakness, any danger to my soldiers, and we abort immediately. Understood? Elias nodded. Understood, sir. With the commander's approval, the work took on a new intensity. The alien soldiers, now organized into efficient teams, accelerated the construction process. What had seemed an impossible task the night before now appeared achievable. By midday, they had extended their bridge system nearly 500 meters into the swamp, crossing 3 major gaps between areas of solid ground. The process was labor-intensive, but effective. Scouts would identify the next stable area. Engineers would calculate the gap distance. Construction teams would build or move platforms to create the bridge, and security teams would test its stability before allowing the main group to cross. Elias worked alongside them all, rotating between teams to offer guidance where needed. He found the aliens surprisingly adaptable once they overcame their initial resistance to physical labor. The Vizari, with their enhanced neural processing, quickly mastered the complex knotting techniques. The Harkians, with their natural strength, excelled at moving the heavy log materials. Even the Drenak, with their heightened senses, proved invaluable in identifying stable paths forward. It was during their 4th bridge placement that they encountered their first major challenge. As they pushed the floating platforms into position, the viscous fluid of the swamp began to bubble ominously around them. The temperature rose noticeably, and a sulfurous smell permeated the air. "Back!" shouted Rune, the Drenak scout, his bioluminescent spots flashing warning patterns. "Something's coming!" The teams retreated to the nearest solid ground as the bubbling intensified. Suddenly, a massive form breached the surface, a creature like a cross between an earthworm and a crocodile. Its segmented body nearly 10 meters long, with multiple rows of serrated teeth lining a circular mouth. Without their powered weapons, the alien soldiers were limited to basic sidearms and physical combat tools. They formed a defensive line as the creature slithered partially onto their latest bridge section, testing its strength. "Hold position," ordered Verex, his voice steady despite the threat. Conserve ammunition. We don't know how many of these we'll encounter. Elias studied the creature's behavior, noting how it seemed more curious than aggressive, probing the unfamiliar structure with its sensory appendages. "Sir," he said quietly to Verex, "I don't think it's hunting. It's territorial, investigating an intrusion." "Your point, Corporal?" "If we show it we're just passing through, not establishing territory, it might let us be. These creatures must have evolved to recognize temporary versus permanent intrusions." Verex considered this. "And how do you propose we communicate that to a primitive life form?" Elias thought quickly. "The bridge. It's too solid, too permanent looking. If we separate the sections, show movement, it might recognize we're just passing through." The commander was silent for a moment, then nodded. "Lieutenant Nex, detach the forward sections. Make it clear this is a temporary crossing." The Vizari officer quickly organized her team. They carefully untied the front sections of the bridge, allowing them to drift slightly apart while still maintaining a crossable path. The creature watched, its multiple eyes tracking their movements. Slowly, the bubbling subsided. The creature made a low, rumbling sound, then slid backward into the swamp, disappearing beneath the surface. A collective breath was released among the group. "Well reasoned, Corporal," Verex said quietly. "Your observation skills are adequate." From Verex, it was high praise indeed. They continued their progress through the day, encountering 2 more of the massive swamp creatures, but each time using Elias's strategy of demonstrating temporary passage rather than permanent intrusion. By nightfall, they had covered nearly a quarter of the total distance to the downed research vessel. As they established camp on a relatively large area of solid ground, the mood among the alien soldiers had shifted noticeably. There was less disdain in their interactions with Elias, more willingness to listen to his suggestions. Some even sought his advice on matters beyond the bridge construction, asking about human adaptation techniques and survival strategies. Lieutenant Nex sat beside him as he sketched plans for the next day's route. "Your species relies on physical tools," she observed, watching him work. "Yet you seem to have internal resources as well." Elias glanced up. "We call it ingenuity, making do with what's available." "A necessity born of technological limitation," she suggested. He shook his head. "A strength born of diverse challenges. Earth has so many different environments, climates, terrains. We had to adapt to all of them before we had technology to help us." She was silent for a moment, her skin shifting through thoughtful colors. "I was taught that humans were fortunate to be accepted into the Alliance, that you had little to offer except as a cautionary example of stunted development. And now?" Her skin flushed a deep blue. "I am reconsidering certain assumptions." The night passed without incident, though the alien soldiers struggled with the concept of sleep without the aid of their neural regulators. Many had never experienced natural sleep cycles, having relied on technology to optimize their rest periods since childhood. Elias taught them basic relaxation techniques, showing them how to create comfortable sleeping surfaces from the softer vegetation and how to establish watch rotations to ensure security. By morning, most had managed at least some rest, though they awoke disoriented and irritable. The second day brought new challenges. The weather on Jarnac 4 changed abruptly, a thin, acidic rain beginning to fall as they prepared to move out. The vegetation they had used for the bridges began to react to the rainfall, the log-like structures becoming more buoyant but also more flexible, making the bridges less stable. Elias quickly adapted their design, adding diagonal bracing and creating covered sections to shield the most vulnerable materials from direct rainfall. The modifications slowed their progress, but maintained the integrity of their crossing. By midday, they had reached what appeared to be the center of the swamp basin. Here, the viscous fluid was at its deepest, with few areas of solid ground. The gaps they needed to bridge stretched longer, some nearly 100 meters across open swamp. "We need to adjust our approach," Elias told Varex as they surveyed the challenge ahead. "These spans are too long for our current platform design." The commander's mandibles clicked in frustration. "Then what do you suggest? Human? Swimming through acid?" Elias ignored the sarcasm. "We build fewer, stronger bridges, anchored floating piers rather than temporary platforms. It will take more time to construct each section, but they'll be stable enough for these longer crossings." "More delays," Varex growled. "Better than sinking, sir." The commander reluctantly agreed, and they set to work on the new design. This construction was more complex, requiring stronger binding materials and more precise placement. The alien soldiers, now well into their second day of physical labor, showed signs of fatigue, their bodies unused to such sustained effort without technological assistance. Yet, they persevered, many finding unexpected satisfaction in the tangible results of their work. As each new pier section was completed and successfully placed, a sense of accomplishment spread through the group, an emotional response many of them had rarely experienced in their technology-mediated lives. It was late afternoon when disaster struck. They were testing a newly completed pier section when the weather changed again. The acidic rain stopped abruptly, and the purple sky darkened to a deep indigo. The same static electricity Elias had felt before the first magnetic storm began to build. "Storm approaching," called Rune, his bioluminescent spots pulsing in alarm patterns. "Big one, coming fast." "Secure the bridges!" Elias shouted. "Double anchor everything!" The teams scrambled to reinforce their structures, but the storm hit with devastating speed. Lightning not only struck from above, but seemed to travel through the swamp itself, blue-white energy arcing across the viscous fluid. One bolt struck near their latest pier section, sending a shockwave through the structure. The bindings held, but the impact shifted the pier, leaving it at an awkward angle that threatened its stability. "It's breaking apart," called Lieutenant Nex, who was on the pier with 3 other aliens when the lightning hit. "We can't hold it." Without hesitation, Elias grabbed a coil of vine rope and ran onto the damaged pier. The structure swayed dangerously beneath his feet, sections beginning to separate as the bindings strained against the force of the impact. He dropped to his knees at the weakest point, quickly weaving the rope through the existing structure in a pattern that distributed the stress. "Hold this!" he called to Nex, tossing her one end of the rope while he worked with the other. Together, they fought to stabilize the pier as lightning continued to strike around them. The other aliens watched in tense silence, unable to help without risking additional weight on the damaged structure. Finally, the reinforced bindings held. The pier settled, still at an angle, but no longer in danger of breaking apart. Elias and Nex made their way carefully back to solid ground as the storm began to dissipate as quickly as it had formed. "That was, unnecessary risk," Varex said as Elias returned. But there was a new note in his voice, something almost like respect. "The mission required it, sir," Elias replied simply. The commander studied him for a moment, then nodded once before turning to organize the next phase of their crossing. By nightfall, they had successfully navigated the central basin, reaching another area of relatively stable ground where they could establish camp. They were now more than halfway to their destination, though the toll of the journey was evident in the exhausted postures of the alien soldiers, as they gathered around bioluminescent fungi for light and warmth. A subtle shift had occurred in the group dynamic. Where Elias had once been an outsider, tolerated, but not included, he now found himself at the center of their circle, consulted on decisions and included in conversations. Gorik, the Harkian warrior, approached him with a portion of their rations. "You should eat," he said gruffly. "Tomorrow will be difficult." Elias accepted the food with a nod of thanks. "How are your hands holding up?" The warrior looked down at his palms, where calluses were beginning to form from the unfamiliar labor. "They will heal, and perhaps They will remember. Remember? Gorik's mandibles clicked softly. My ancestors built cities with their hands, before neural interfaces and molecular assemblers. I never understood why they would choose such inefficiency. He flexed his fingers thoughtfully. Now, I begin to see what was lost in our progress. Similar conversations echoed around the camp. The aliens, stripped of their technology, were reconnecting with aspects of their heritage long forgotten in their rush toward advancement. Lieutenant Nex spoke of ancient Visari water rituals that suddenly made sense in the context of their bridge building. Rune shared Drenak hunting techniques that paralleled Elias's observation methods. Even Tuong Verex, who maintained his distance from these discussions, seemed to be reassessing certain assumptions. Elias caught the commander watching him throughout the evening. 4 eyes narrowed in thoughtful consideration, rather than disdain. The third day dawned clear. The purple sky of Jarnak 4 unusually bright. They set out early, aware that they still had significant ground to cover before reaching the downed research vessel. The terrain ahead proved less treacherous than the central basin, with more frequent patches of solid ground and narrower gaps to bridge. Their progress accelerated, the alien soldiers now working with practiced efficiency, no longer needing constant guidance from Elias. By midday, they caught their first glimpse of their destination, the research vessel, its sleek form half buried in the swamp at the far edge of the basin. The sight energized the group, many of whom had begun to doubt they would complete their mission without technological assistance. We'll need one final major crossing, Elias told Verex as they surveyed the remaining distance. About 80 meters of open swamp. Then we're there. The commander nodded. Begin construction. I want us at that vessel before nightfall. The final bridge was their most ambitious yet. A straight shot across open swamp to the solid ground surrounding the crashed ship. Every available team member contributed to its construction, applying all the techniques they had developed over the past 3 days. As they worked, Elias noticed increasing activity in the swamp around them. The massive worm-crocodile creatures were gathering, their segmented bodies occasionally breaking the surface as they circled the construction area. They're agitated, observed Rune, his spots pulsing with concern. Something's changed. Lieutenant Nex looked up from her binding work. The ship. It must have disturbed their environment when it crashed. They see it as an intrusion. And now we're connecting directly to it, Elias realized. We're creating a permanent link in their minds. Verex considered this information. Options. Corporal. The fact that the commander asked for his input, rather than issuing an order, marked how far they had come in 3 days. Elias thought quickly, observing the creature's movement patterns. We complete the bridge, but we cross in a way that makes our intentions clear. Small groups, moving quickly, no stopping. Once we've retrieved the black box, we begin dismantling the bridge from the ship side, showing we're leaving. The commander nodded. A sound strategy. Lieutenant Nex, organize the crossing teams. Gorik, prepare defensive positions on both ends of the bridge. Rune, monitor the creature's reactions. They completed the final bridge by late afternoon, a remarkable achievement given their limited resources and the hostile environment. As they prepared to cross, the swamp creatures became increasingly active, breaking the surface more frequently, their circular mouths opening to reveal rows of teeth. They're preparing to defend their territory, warned Rune. We need to move now. Verex organized the crossing. First team, Rune, Nex, and 3 security personnel. Second team, technical specialists who will retrieve the black box. Third team, remaining security. I will cross last with Corporal Brandt. Elias looked at him in surprise. Sir? This is your construction, Corporal. You should see it through to completion. The first team crossed without incident, moving quickly and purposefully across the floating bridge. The swamp creatures followed their progress, but did not approach. The second team followed, carrying the equipment they would need to access the ship's secured data storage. As the third team prepared to cross, one of the creatures surged forward, its massive body colliding with the bridge. The structure held, but the impact sent waves across the viscous fluid, destabilizing several sections. "Go!" ordered Varix to the third team. "Quickly!" They moved across the swaying bridge, their progress hampered by the increasingly violent movement of the swamp creatures, which now seemed to be deliberately testing the structure's integrity. Finally, only Elias and Varix remained on the near side of the bridge. The structure was visibly weakening, sections beginning to separate as the bindings strained under the repeated impacts. "We need to cross now, sir," Elias urged. "The bridge won't hold much longer." The commander nodded, and they stepped onto the floating structure. They had made it halfway across when a particularly large creature rammed the bridge directly beneath them. The impact nearly threw them into the swamp, both grabbing at the structure to maintain balance. As they regained their footing, Elias saw that a critical binding had snapped. The bridge was beginning to separate into two sections, creating a gap that would soon be too wide to cross. "Jump to the forward section," he called to Varix. "I'll hold this side as long as I can." The commander hesitated, his four eyes meeting Elias's gaze. "That's an order to a superior officer, Corporal." Despite the dire situation, Elias couldn't help a small smile. "Just a strong suggestion, sir." Varix's mandibles clicked in what might have been appreciation. Then he gathered himself and leaped across the widening gap, landing heavily on the forward section of the bridge. The impact further destabilized both sections, the gap now nearly 2 meters wide. Elias knew he had one chance. He backed up as far as he dared on the unstable platform, then ran forward and launched himself across the gap. For a heart-stopping moment, he was airborne over the acidic swamp, the creatures circling below. Then, strong hands grabbed him, Varix, reaching out to secure his landing. The commander pulled him onto the forward section just as the rear platform completely detached, sinking slowly into the swamp. "An impressive leap," Varix remarked, as they hurried toward the shore, where the rest of the team waited. "Necessity, sir."
"Indeed."
They reached solid ground, just as another swamp creature rammed the remaining bridge section, breaking it into multiple pieces. The path behind them was now completely gone, but they had made it to their destination. The research vessel was partially buried in the marshy ground, its sleek form designed for atmospheric research rather than space travel. The technical team had already located an access point and was working to open it without power tools. "Status?" Varix asked as he approached. "Almost through, sir," replied the lead technician. "The manual override is responding." Minutes later, they had access to the ship's interior. The alien design was familiar to the galactic soldiers, allowing them to navigate quickly to the central data core despite the vessel's tilted position. The black box, actually a spherical device containing all the ship's research data, was intact, its autonomous power system still functioning despite the crash. The technical team carefully removed it from its housing and secured it for transport. "Mission accomplished," announced Varix, a note of genuine satisfaction in his voice. "Now, we need to consider our extraction." As the sun began to set on Jarnac 4, casting long purple shadows across the swamp, the team gathered to assess their situation. They had completed their primary objective, but they were still stranded without functional technology, their path back now destroyed by the swamp creatures. "We have two options," Varix told the group. "We can attempt to follow the shoreline around the basin, which would take approximately 5 days, but avoid crossing the swamp again. Or we can build new bridges on a different route, possibly cutting the time to 3 days." The alien soldiers looked to Elias, waiting for his input. Even Varix seemed to be deferring to his judgment on this matter. "The shoreline," Elias said after considering the options. "The creatures are agitated now, and we've used most of the suitable materials near our current position. Following the shore will be slower, but safer." Varix nodded. Shoreline it is. We'll establish camp here tonight and move out at dawn. As the alien night descended, they set up a perimeter around the crash site, using debris from the ship to construct basic shelters. The mood was one of cautious celebration. They had succeeded against tremendous odds, retrieving the valuable data despite the loss of their technology. Lieutenant Nex approached Elias as he was checking their ration supplies. "I've been analyzing our construction methods," she said, her skin a thoughtful purple. "With refinements, they could be adapted for emergency use in similar environments." Elias looked up in surprise. "You're considering adding primitive technology to galactic protocols?" Her skin flushed blue briefly. "I prefer the term foundation technology. Neural interfaces and molecular assemblers are impressive, but they are built upon more basic principles we have perhaps too quickly forgotten." Nearby, Gorik was teaching younger soldiers how to create more comfortable sleeping surfaces using techniques Elias had shown him. Rune was sketching the swamp creatures in the soil, using observational methods he had learned over the past days. Tuong Verex stood apart, watching his transformed command with an unreadable expression. He noticed Elias's gaze and beckoned him over. "Your assessment, Corporal," the commander said as Elias approached. "Will they remember these lessons when their technology is restored?" Elias considered the question carefully. "Some will, sir. Others will return to what's comfortable. But knowledge, once gained, is never truly lost." Verex was silent for a moment, his four eyes scanning the horizon where the last purple light was fading. "When we return to galactic space, I will be filing a report on this mission." "Yes, sir. I will be recommending that Earth representatives be included in more terrain-critical operations. Your perspective has proven valuable." Coming from Verex, it was a remarkable admission. "Thank you, sir." The commander's mandibles clicked softly. "Do not let it go to your head, Corporal. You are still a primitive species by galactic standards." "Of course, sir." As Elias turned to leave, Verex added, "But perhaps primitiveness has its advantages." That night, as the alien soldiers gathered around bioluminescent fungi for light and warmth, there was a new dynamic to their interaction. Where once there had been rigid hierarchy and technological dependence, now there was a community forged through shared struggle and mutual respect. Elias found himself welcomed into their circle, no longer an outsider to be tolerated, but a valued member of the team. They asked him about Earth, about human adaptation strategies, about the skills his people had developed before joining the Galactic Alliance. In turn, he learned about their worlds, their histories, the ancient techniques their ancestors had used before neural interfaces and molecular assemblers had changed their civilizations. Stories long forgotten in their technological advancement, now remembered in this moment of forced simplicity. As the night deepened, Rune, the Drenak scout, approached Elias with a small object crafted from swamp materials, a symbol in the Drenak tradition, representing a guide who leads through darkness. "For the bridge builder," he said simply, placing it in Elias's hand. The name spread quickly through the group. By morning, none called him human or corporal anymore. To all of them, he was bridge builder, a title of respect that transcended rank or species. They began their journey back along the shoreline at dawn, a 5-day trek that would test their endurance, but not their ingenuity. The bridges that had brought them across the swamp were gone, dismantled by the creatures, or dissolved by the acidic fluid. But something more important remained, a connection between beings who had found common ground in the most unlikely of places. As they marched along the shore of the alien swamp, Black Box secured, Elias reflected on the bridges they had built, not just of logs and vines across a physical gap, but of understanding across a cultural one. Both were temporary, constructed for a specific purpose, then released when that purpose was fulfilled. But the knowledge of how to build them remained. In the purple light of Jarnak IV's dawn, that seemed like the most important bridge of all.